Hi, this is Tim Oakley. Welcome to 10 Minute Lean In. I'm so thankful that you're taking the time to lean in with us today as I talk about something that I feel we all can relate to, as we've all been there, as tough times have happened to every one of us, and really tough times that come our way in life. They're sometimes just hard to understand. They're hard to explain, right? And it can really be hard on our faith. And what some people go do is they go lay blame on God. And then they may go ask for an explanation, but they get silence. They may ask for understanding. They don't get any clarity. It takes faith. It takes a deep, strong faith to trust in God when unexplained tragedies are happening. And perhaps the greatest expression of deep, strong faith comes from the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk. It's kind of a hard name to say, Habakkuk. But most of the prophets of the Old Testament spoke to the people for God, but Habakkuk spoke to God for the people. And he lived in times where we saw godly people suffering and the wicked were prospering. And he asked God two questions that we often ask ourselves. Why are these things happening? How long will it be before change will be for the better? I mean, aren't those the kinds of questions that we're asking today in our modern day climate with everything that seems to be happening around us? But because of his nation's disobedience to God, God revealed to Habakkuk that the Babylonians, who was the very essence of everything that Habakkuk and his people detested, that they were going to invade, they were going to pillage, and they were going to ransack them. Habakkuk and his people were going to lose everything that they had built up over the years, everything that they had worked for. It was all going to be gone. And Habakkuk, he didn't understand it, and he for sure didn't like it. Yet throughout his time of punishment, God reminded Habakkuk of the correct way that a person of faith should live and think when he said, "The righteous will live by their faithfulness to God," in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Habakkuk realized that though he did not understand God's way or timing, that he could not doubt God's wisdom, his love, and his reliability. And then this is what he wrote in Habakkuk chapter 3, verses 16 through 19. When Habakkuk said, "I trembled inside when I heard this. My lips quivered with fear. My legs gave way beneath me, and I shook in terror. I will wait quietly for the coming day when disaster will strike the people who invade us. And even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crops fail and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation." Wow. Let's remember that when God initially revealed to him of the horrible judgments to come, he was overcome by fear. And it hits him both emotionally and physically. When he said that my body trembles, he's using a word that describes violent earthquakes. He is shaken to the core. He's falling apart. And then he said that his lips quiver. He's unable to form the words of expression because of his dread. He is in such shock that his feet are unable to move. Maybe the same thing has happened to you when you first heard news of some tragedy that hit really close to home in your life. You are overcome by dread and sorrow, and you feel drained physically. Do you get where I'm coming from today? Have you been there? So, how do you exercise faith in God during the worst of times? Habakkuk said in verse 16 to wait patiently to God. He said to wait patiently for God, even when we're afraid. There was no hoping that the invasion would be stopped and the tragedy would not strike because God said it was going to happen. But God also promised that he would eventually judge the Babylonians for their sin and he would ultimately deliver his people again. But that was not going to happen in Habakkuk's lifetime. But listen to me here. He believed it. And this is the way that many of God's promises are. They don't always get fulfilled immediately or in the next few months or maybe even in the next few years. But are we willing to trust God that far out? We know that God's coming back again, but it may not happen during our life here on earth. We know that God is going to defeat evil, as that is his promise and his word, but it does not mean that we will see evil overcome in 2023. So the key is believing and waiting. The phrase, wait patiently, comes from the Hebrew word meaning to rest or to settle down and remain. It's what King David expressed in Psalm chapter 62, verse 1, when he says, my soul finds rest in God. So instead of allowing his heart to continue to be shaken by fear and anxiety, he chose to settle his heart on God's promises, to rest in God and his promises, and that is where peace comes from. To conclude, in verse 19, he writes, the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. God can give you hope because God is able. God can give you what you need for a day and a time such as this. No matter what your situation may be in life, we can be assured that God can make us to be sure-footed, even though we may, our culture may seem to have unstable ground and unstable foundation. When we trust in God and we put our hope in him, he can give us the strength to rest in him and to give us sure footing because we know that God is going to answer his promises and they're all going to come to fruition. My prayer is for you today is that God would give you hope. No matter the difficulty or the situation that you're going through today, it's okay to be concerned. Habakkuk here shook. He was fearful. He trembled. His lips quivered. His body, he couldn't even hardly control his bodily functions because of the fear, but yet he waited patiently on God because he rested in the promises of God. Rest on the promises of God. That's my prayer for you today, that your faith would be raised up and that you would wait patiently on him in his due time. Thanks again for watching. I always like to request that you would give this a like and subscribe. Thank you so much and share as well. Have a blessed day.